I've stared death in the face, and what I saw on the other side is something you won't believe. It's not just a warning, it's a call to action. The signs are all around us, but if we don't act now, it will be too late. You don't want to miss the shocking truth I'm about to reveal.
Welcome to a story like no other, one that will shake you to your core and make you rethink everything. If you're ready to uncover the shocking truths about life, death, and what's waiting on the other side, then you're in the right place. But before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video with anyone you know who needs to hear this. And remember, if you feel moved, leave a prayer or a thought in the comments below. Let's make this journey together.
It all started like any other day. I woke up, had breakfast, and went about my routine. Nothing felt unusual until everything changed in an instant. I remember the exact moment. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and then nothing. Darkness. The next thing I knew, I was standing outside my body. I could see myself lying there lifeless. People were panicking around me, but I felt strangely calm until I wasn't. A force I can't explain pulled me upward. At first, it was gentle like a breeze, but then it became stronger, faster. I wasn't ready for what came next. Have you ever felt completely exposed, like your every thought, every secret, was laid bare? That's how it felt. It wasn't just my body I left behind. It was everything I ever knew. And then the light. It was blinding, but it wasn't warm or comforting. It was piercing, like it was searching every corner of my soul. That's when I heard the voice. Deep, commanding, and unmistakable. You have been given the chance to see what's coming, it said. I tried to speak, but no words came out. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. I wanted to ask, what's coming? But before I could, everything around me shifted. I was no longer in that room. I wasn't anywhere I could recognize. Instead, I was in a vast, endless space, surrounded by something that felt alive. The voice spoke again, this time sharper, more direct. Watch closely. What you see is not for you alone. It is for all who still have a choice. And then it began. Have you ever wondered what happens after the rapture? What happens to the world, to the people left behind? What I saw, it was worse than any nightmare you can imagine. But I'll warn you now, this isn't a story for the faint of heart. If you think the world is dark now, you have no idea what's coming. Let me tell you about the guide who appeared next. This being was unlike anything I'd ever seen before, and the things they showed me, let's just say you'll never forget it. Stay with me. You need to hear this. The encounter, meeting the guide, I stood there in that strange, endless space, unsure of what would happen next. My mind raced with questions, but my body wouldn't respond. I felt frozen, like a small child lost in a world too big to understand. Then I saw it, or should I say them. At first, I couldn't make out the figure. It was like looking at a shadow in a blinding light. But as they came closer, their form became clear. This wasn't a person. It wasn't even human. I know what you're thinking. What did they look like? Were they terrifying? Angelic? The truth is, I can't fully describe it. They had a presence that made my heart pound. Not from fear, but from knowing I was in the presence of something far greater than myself. This being didn't speak with words, at least not at first. Instead, their voice was in my mind, as clear as if they were standing right next to me. You have been chosen to see what awaits, they said. I wanted to ask, why me? But before I could, they raised a hand, or something like a hand, and the space around us shifted again. It was like the air had been ripped apart, showing me another world, another time. The being turned to me and said, watch carefully. What you see is real. It is what will happen after the rapture. Do you know that feeling you get when you're about to hear something life-changing? That mix of dread and curiosity? That's exactly how I felt. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't turn away. And then they said something that chilled me to my core. For many, it will be too late. But for you, there is still time. Still time for what? I didn't know. All I knew was that what I was about to see would change me forever. That's when the visions began. Let me take you to the first scene I was shown. The moment the first bowl is poured out. You might want to brace yourself for this. It's not like anything you've ever heard before. The first bowl. Disgusting sores and unbearable smell. I thought I'd seen pain before. I thought I understood what it meant for people to suffer. But what I saw when the first bowl was poured out was something else entirely. I was pulled into the scene, surrounded by people who were screaming, clawing at their own flesh. Their bodies were covered in sores, deep, oozing wounds that looked like they burned from the inside out. It was like their skin was alive, but in the worst possible way. The smell hit me next. It wasn't just bad, it was unbearable. It clung to the air, to everything. Have you ever smelled something so disgusting it made your stomach churn instantly? Imagine that, but worse. It was thick, suffocating, and there was no escape. I looked at the people around me. These were men and women who had once been powerful, confident. Now they were crumbling, crawling on the ground, begging for the pain to stop. But there was no relief. None. I turned to the guide, desperate for answers. Why is this happening? What did they do to deserve this? I could feel my voice trembling, but I needed to know. They chose this, the guide said calmly. They took the mark. They aligned themselves with evil, and now they are reaping the consequences. Hearing those words made my chest tighten. I couldn't breathe. These people had made their choice, but the price was so much worse than I ever could have imagined. And then I noticed something that shook me even more. There were others in the scene, people without sores. They didn't have the marks on their bodies, but they were still there, gagging from the smell, covering their faces, trying to stay upright as chaos unfolded around them. Why are they here? I asked the guide. Why are they suffering too? The guide looked at me with an expression I can only describe as sadness. They didn't take the mark, but they didn't prepare either. This is their reality now. My heart broke. I wanted to scream at those people, to shake them and tell them they still had a chance, back then, before all of this happened. But now it was too late. I couldn't stop asking myself, what if this were me? What if I had ignored the warnings? What if I had been left behind? And then the guide's voice cut through my thoughts again. This is only the first bowl. You still have much to see. Before I could even process what I had witnessed, the scene began to change. The ground beneath me faded, replaced by something that made my stomach drop. The second bowl. The sea becomes blood. When the guide took me to the next scene, I thought I was prepared. After seeing the sores and hearing the screams, I believed nothing could shock me anymore. But I was wrong. The air was different here, heavy, suffocating. I was standing on the edge of what should have been the ocean. But it wasn't an ocean anymore. It was blood. Thick, dark red blood stretched as far as the eye could see. The waves moved sluggishly, like something too thick to flow. The smell was unbearable. Worse than the sores. Worse than anything I could have imagined. It was the smell of death. The surface of the water was littered with dead fish. They floated lifelessly, their silver bodies stained crimson. There were whales, sharks, creatures so large I couldn't even name them. All of them dead. The sea wasn't just lifeless, it was cursed. I stood there, frozen. My chest felt tight, and I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. And then I saw the people. They were scattered along the shore, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. Some were reaching into the blood, pulling out fish, trying to clean them, trying to find something edible. But it was no use. Everything they touched turned to poison. Why are they doing this? I asked the guide. Can't they see there's nothing left to save? They're desperate, the guide said quietly. This is what happens when hope dies but hunger remains. Those words hit me hard. I kept watching as a man collapsed on the shore, his hands clutching at a fish that was already decaying in his grip. A woman nearby was crying, holding a small child who looked too weak to move. Was this their fault? I asked. Did they do something to deserve this? The guide's voice was steady, but there was a weight in it that I couldn't ignore. They rejected the warnings. They chose the mark, and with it, they chose this fate. But it's more than that. This is the natural result of turning away from life and toward destruction. I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing. Could this really happen? Could the seas, the very heart of life on Earth, be taken away just like that? The guide must have sensed my thoughts because they looked at me and said, "The oceans are the foundation of life. Without them, the balance is broken." But this is just the beginning. Just the beginning. I felt a shiver run through me. If this was only the second bowl, what could possibly come next? How much worse could it get? And then the scene started to change. The ocean faded, replaced by rivers and lakes. But something was wrong. The water wasn't clean. It wasn't fresh. My stomach dropped as I realized what I was seeing. The blood wasn't just in the sea anymore. The third bowl. Fresh water turns to blood. The transition was so fast, it felt like I was ripped out of one nightmare and thrown into another. The sea of blood disappeared, replaced by rivers, streams, and lakes. At first, I felt a glimmer of hope. Fresh water meant life, didn't it? Maybe this part wouldn't be as horrible. But then I saw it. The rivers, the lakes, even the smallest puddles, they weren't filled with water. They were thick, dark red, just like the ocean before. Blood, everywhere. The once crystal clear streams that people had relied on were now running with death. I looked closer and noticed something that made my stomach churn. The edges of the rivers were lined with people. Some were kneeling, their hands cupped as they tried to drink. I wanted to yell at them to stop, to scream that it wasn't water. But no sound came out. They drank anyway, and as they did, their faces twisted in agony. Some began to vomit. Others clutched their throats as if something was burning them from the inside. They fell to the ground one by one, their cries of pain echoing like a terrible chorus. "Why?" I whispered to the guide. "Why would they drink it if it's killing them?" The guide's eyes were filled with a sorrow I couldn't understand. Because they have no choice. This is the judgment they chose when they ignored the warnings. Without water, there's no life. But this, I couldn't tear my eyes away. A child was lying by the edge of the river, too weak to move. His mother was trying to squeeze drops of the blood into his mouth, tears streaming down her face. She knew it wouldn't save him, but she didn't know what else to do. The sky above us was gray, heavy with a silence that pressed down on me like a weight. No rain would come. No relief. And then I saw the angels. They stood over the rivers and lakes, pouring something into the blood. Their faces were solemn, their movements deliberate. Whatever they were adding made the blood bubble and hiss, like acid eating through flesh. The smell that rose up was unbearable, worse than anything I'd ever experienced. "What are they doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They are carrying out the judgment," the guide said. "This is a justice that was demanded by those who cried out for it. For the blood of the innocent that was spilled. This is the answer." I felt sick. The weight of those words hit me like a blow. I turned back to the rivers, to the lakes, to the people who were still trying to find something to drink. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow. Some had already given up, lying motionless on the ground. "Is there no mercy?" I asked the guide, my voice breaking. The guide looked at me, their expression unreadable. Mercy was offered. It was rejected. Now there is only justice. I wanted to wake up. I wanted to believe this wasn't real, that it was just a bad dream. But the pain, the desperation, the horror, it was too vivid to be anything but the truth. And as I stood there, staring at the blood-soaked world, I realized something that made my heart race with fear. This was only the third bowl. There were still more to come. At this point, you might think it couldn't get any worse. But the guide wasn't done. The next vision would strip away what little hope remained. The fourth bowl. The scorching sun. I thought I had seen everything. Oceans turned to blood, rivers stripped of life, and people driven mad with thirst. But the next scene, it shattered something inside me. The sky looked different now. The sun was no longer a distant, gentle light. It had swollen, pulsating like a living thing. Its heat radiating so fiercely that I felt it on my skin as if I were there. At first, it seemed beautiful. A golden glow bathed the earth, making everything shimmer. But then I saw what it was doing. People were running, screaming, desperately searching for shade. Trees that should have offered protection were withering before their eyes, their leaves curling and falling as if they'd been set on fire. The ground cracked open, the earth itself unable to bear the intensity. I watched a man collapse in the middle of a dirt road, his skin red and blistering as if he'd been burned alive. He clawed at the ground, his voice hoarse as he cried out, "Why? Why is this happening?" I wanted to turn away, but the guide held my gaze steady. "Look closer," they said. And so I did. The sun wasn't just burning the skin, it was burning hope. The light carried something more than heat. It was anger. It was judgment. It wasn't just punishing the body, it was breaking the spirit. People began cursing the sun, the sky, even their own lives. Their cries were filled with bitterness and rage, as if blaming the very heavens would make it stop. But it didn't stop. The rivers of blood I had seen earlier, they began to dry up, leaving behind cracked, crimson-stained earth. Animals lay dead in the fields, their bodies twisted as if they'd fought against the heat until their last breath. And then I saw her, a woman holding a baby, her face streaked with tears. She pressed her child close to her chest, shielding him with her body. The skin on her arms was raw, blistered from the sun's unforgiving rays. She whispered something over and over, but I couldn't hear her words. I wanted to scream at the guide. Why doesn't she just let go? Why is she fighting so hard when there's no escape? The guide's voice was calm, but their eyes were heavy with sorrow. Because love doesn't give up, even when there's no hope. I felt a lump in my throat. This wasn't just judgment, it was unbearable. I couldn't look away from her, even though every second made my chest ache more. And then I heard the screams change. They weren't just from pain anymore. They were from fear. I turned my head toward the horizon and saw something that made my blood run cold. The sun, already blinding, began to shift. It was as if it had decided to burn brighter, hotter. People dropped to their knees, shielding their faces as the light consumed them. "Is this the end?" I whispered. The guide didn't answer. And in that silence, I realized something that made my heart pound. The scorching sun wasn't just punishing, it was exposing. It burned away everything people had used to hide who they were. Their anger, their greed, their pride. It all came pouring out like poison. This wasn't just about heat, it was about truth. And truth was far more painful than I had ever imagined. But the worst part, the sun wasn't finished yet. The next vision would reveal the full weight of what was coming. If you think fire and light were terrifying, just wait until the very air turns against you. Let me tell you about the fifth bowl. Darkness and pain. The fifth bowl. Utter darkness. Have you ever been in a room so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face? Now multiply that by 10. No, by 100. That's what I saw, but it wasn't just darkness. It was something alive. When the vision shifted, the light from the scorching sun vanished instantly, as if someone had turned off a switch. The world was swallowed whole by blackness. It wasn't the kind of darkness you feel safe in. It wasn't peaceful or quiet. This was heavy, suffocating, and filled with a coldness that reached deep into my soul. I could hear people screaming, crying, and stumbling. They were clawing at the air, their hands outstretched as if trying to grab onto anything solid. I thought, why are they so scared? It's just dark, isn't it? But then I felt it too. The darkness wasn't empty. It was crawling with something I couldn't see, but I knew it was there. I felt it brushing against me. Something slimy, something that whispered in voices I couldn't understand. My skin prickled, and every hair on my body stood up. And then I heard them. The people weren't just afraid. They were in agony. They were gnashing their teeth, their screams turning raw and guttural. Some were hitting their heads against walls, others clawing at their own faces as if trying to rip something away. I turned to the guide, my voice trembling. "What is this? Why are they doing that?" "They feel it too," the guide said. "This is darkness that doesn't just blind the eyes. It blinds the heart." The words hit me like a punch. This wasn't just about losing light. This was about losing everything that gives life meaning. Hope, joy, love, all of it had been stripped away. I saw a man curled up in the corner of what looked like his home. He was rocking back and forth, his hands covering his ears. His lips were moving, but no sound came out. He was mouthing words over and over again. When I leaned in, I finally understood. He was saying, "Make it stop. Please make it stop." But nothing stopped. The darkness seemed to thicken, wrapping around the people like a suffocating blanket. And then it started pressing down on them, as if it had weight. I watched them struggle to stand, their knees buckling under the pressure. Their voices became hoarse from screaming, and yet they couldn't stop. What shocked me most was what I saw next. There were kings, rulers, and powerful people who had once been untouchable. They were no different now. Their crowns were gone, their clothes tattered. They were on their knees, crawling like the rest, lost in the same torment. And I thought, what kind of darkness could bring even the mighty so low? I turned back to the guide. My voice cracked as I asked, how can they survive this? How does it end? The guide didn't answer, but their face was filled with sorrow. Then something shifted. I heard whispers that turned into shrieks. The people were cursing someone they couldn't see. Their words were filled with venom, their fists shaking at the sky. They cursed the Creator, the guide said softly. But they refused to change. Even now, they choose anger over repentance. I couldn't understand it. How could anyone endure this and still hold on to their pride? But I realized that's what the darkness fed on. Their anger, their bitterness. It only made the blackness stronger. And then I noticed something chilling. No one was helping each other. No one reached out to comfort. No one tried to share the pain. They were all consumed by their own suffering, completely alone. I felt the air around me grow colder, and my breath came out in visible puffs. Is this how it ends? I asked. The guide looked at me, their eyes heavy with sadness. This is just the beginning. What came next made this darkness look like a fleeting shadow. The next bowl didn't just affect the earth or the people. It reached into the very skies themselves. If you think utter darkness was unbearable, wait until you see the sixth bowl. The Euphrates dries up and armies gather. The sixth bowl. The drying of the Euphrates. I can't even begin to describe the heat. It was as if the sun had never stopped beating down, but now there was something else in the air. Something that made the earth feel like it was cracking open beneath my feet. The Euphrates River. This mighty body of water that had flowed for centuries was slowly drying up before my eyes. At first, it was just a trickle, a small gap where the water should have been. Then, with every passing moment, more and more of it disappeared, like someone was pulling the life from it. I couldn't believe it. This river that had seen so many battles, so many stories, it was vanishing, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. I could hear the distant roar of an army marching. They were coming, and it was only a matter of time before they arrived. The ground beneath me felt parched, as if the river's disappearance had sucked away not just the water but everything. The air was thick, dry, almost suffocating. The smell of dust, of decay, filled my nose. I saw the people standing near the banks of the river, watching in disbelief. They couldn't believe their eyes. How could something so powerful just vanish? The Euphrates had been a lifeline, not just for the people who lived by it, but for entire civilizations. But now, it was nothing more than a cracked, dry riverbed, a hollow reminder of what once was. I asked the guide, why? Why is the river drying up? What's happening? The guide's face was grim. It's a sign. The water that once brought life is now gone. And with it, the nations will come. The armies that gather will cross the riverbed, marching forward without hesitation. They have only one goal. I shuddered. I could feel the weight of it. I knew that the moment the river was gone, nothing would be the same. There would be no turning back. The armies that crossed the dry bed would march toward their destiny, their purpose clouded in violence and fear. And then, as if on cue, I saw them, dark figures in the distance, marching in perfect alignment. They were unstoppable, like a tide that could never be turned. The soldiers' faces were cold, their eyes focused on something I couldn't see. They moved as one, as though they were drawn by a force greater than themselves. What was this force? Where were they headed? Why had the river disappeared, making way for this endless army? I wanted to look away, but something kept me rooted to the spot. My heart was racing. I felt like I could hear the thunder of their footsteps in my chest. My thoughts were screaming, what happens when they get here? What happens to the people? To the world? And just as I was about to ask again, the guide spoke, as if they had read my mind. They're coming to prepare the way. The world is about to face what it cannot avoid. There's no escape from what's coming next. I could see the fear in the people's eyes as they realized it was too late. They had no way of stopping it. And I felt it too, a sense of dread, a knowing that something big was about to happen, something we couldn't prepare for. But I also felt something else, something deeper, that I couldn't shake off. Why hadn't they listened before? Why hadn't they seen the signs? Now it was too late. The river was gone, and the armies were advancing. The final chapter of the story had begun. And I knew, deep down I knew, that the next bowl would bring something even worse. It wasn't just about the earth anymore. The very skies themselves would be affected. The seventh bowl is coming. What will that bring? The seventh bowl. The cataclysmic earthquake. The ground shook. No, it ripped apart beneath me. The earth wasn't just moving. It was screaming, as if it were alive, as if it had been holding its breath for centuries, waiting for this very moment. I had never felt anything like it before. I thought I had seen the worst of it. The heat, the darkness, the armies marching. But nothing prepared me for the raw, violent force of what came next. The moment the seventh bowl was poured out, the world changed. The sky darkened, and then it felt like the world itself split open. The cracks appeared first, small ones at first, like deep, painful lines forming on an old surface. But then the earth began to tremble, the cracks widening, splitting the ground apart like a broken mirror. I saw entire mountains trembling and then collapsing in on themselves. Buildings, tall, strong structures, crumbled like paper in a child's hands. The air felt thick, suffocating, with dust and the sound of destruction. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. I was stuck, unable to move, as if the earth itself was holding me in place. I could hear people screaming, calling for help, but their voices were swallowed by the violent shaking. Everything I knew, everything I took for granted, seemed to be breaking apart. It was as if the very foundation of reality was being torn down. There was no escape from this, no place to run, no safe zone. It didn't matter where you were. The earth was collapsing everywhere. And then, just as I thought it couldn't get any worse, I saw the sky. It wasn't dark anymore, but something much worse had taken its place. The clouds were twisting, swirling in unnatural patterns, as if the heavens themselves were being pulled into the storm. I felt a chill, an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me, knowing that this was only the beginning. The earthquake continued, shaking the world like it was being shaken from its very core. The buildings around me cracked, and I saw the land itself shift in ways I didn't think possible. How long could this last? How much could the earth take before everything was completely gone? I felt my heart racing, and my mind began to spiral. Was this the end? Was there any way out? What could be stronger than this power? And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I felt the ground beneath me open. I was falling, plummeting down into a vast, endless void. The weight of everything, the destruction, the chaos, the fear, pulled me deeper into the darkness. I couldn't see where I was going, but I could feel myself being pulled into the abyss. My heart was pounding as I reached out, trying to hold on to something, anything. But the earth had already claimed everything. There was no escape, no way to stop it. I was being swallowed whole by this cataclysmic event. What would happen next? Was this the end for everyone? Was there any hope left? I didn't know, but I could feel it. The weight of it, the overwhelming force that nothing could stand against. This was no ordinary disaster. It was the final reckoning, and I had no idea how much more the earth could endure. What do you think will happen next? Is there a way to stop it? Or is this the final chapter of it all? Stay tuned. This isn't over yet. The return to life and the final warning. I don't know how long I was there, lost in the darkness, in that place where time doesn't exist, where everything is a blur. But then something shifted, something changed. I remember the feeling, like I was being pulled, no, yanked out of the void, back toward something. I could hear a voice, a soft whisper at first, then a little louder. Come back. It wasn't a command, more like an invitation. But who would want to return to all that chaos? The destruction, the terror? But I felt a pull, like a string tied to my soul, dragging me back toward life. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't like coming back to my body in a peaceful way. It was rough, like something was trying to force me back in, and I didn't know if I could survive it. My chest hurt, my heart was pounding, and everything felt wrong. But I was back. Was this a second chance? Or had I just been thrown into the middle of something bigger than I could understand? I opened my eyes, but what I saw wasn't what I expected. It was the world, broken, shattered in places, but there was still life. People were going about their days, unaware of what had just happened, of what was coming next. I realized we were all living on borrowed time. But how could I make them see? How could I warn them? I knew the earth had been marked, torn apart by forces we could barely comprehend. But this wasn't the end. No, it was only the beginning. The more I looked around, the more I felt this overwhelming sense of urgency. Time wasn't on our side anymore. The world had been given a warning, a chance to change, but I could feel it deep in my bones. Not enough people were listening. Not enough were taking it seriously. What if this was it? What if it was too late to turn things around? I tried to scream. I wanted to shout, to tell everyone to wake up, to see the signs, to feel the shift in the air. But no one could hear me. I felt alone, trapped in this place between life and death, torn between the two worlds. Do you feel it too? Can you sense it? That feeling that something is coming, something we can't escape? We've all been warned, whether we want to admit it or not. And I can't shake the feeling that this isn't the end of a story. But don't let the story end for you. What if you still have time to change things? What if this moment right now is your second chance? What if the world is still holding out hope for us? I'm telling you now before it's too late. Pay attention. Listen to the signs. The warning is clear, but will you act on it? Or will you wait until it's too late to make a difference? The clock is ticking, and I don't know how much longer we have. But I do know this. Something is coming. Something we can't outrun. Do you feel ready? Or will you ignore the signs and risk it all? Stay with me. This isn't over. I know what you're thinking right now. Maybe you're still processing everything you've heard. Maybe you're thinking, how can I change anything? What can I really do? Well, I've been where you are. I've felt the weight of all that's happening in the world, and it can feel overwhelming, like we're powerless. But trust me, that's not true. We're not powerless. Not at all. If there's one thing I learned from all of this, from staring death in the face and being pulled back from the other side, it's that every single one of us has a role to play. You have a choice. Right now, right in this moment, you can make a decision to take action. Don't let this moment pass you by. You've seen the signs, heard the warnings, felt the shift. It's all real, and it's happening. But it doesn't have to be too late. Not if you act now. What's stopping you? Fear? Doubt? FOMO? The fear of missing out on the life you know? I get it. It's scary. But think about it. If you do nothing, if you stay stuck in the same patterns, you're going to miss out on so much more. You'll miss out on the chance to change the course of your life, and maybe even the world around you. You don't have to wait until it's too late. You can start today. You can begin making small changes in your life, shifts in your mindset and your choices. Will you act? Will you be the one who rises up when everyone else is too scared to move? I'm not asking you to take on the world alone. In fact, none of us can do it alone. But we can stand together. We can make our voices heard. And if enough of us rise up, if we truly wake up, we can turn the tide before it's too late. Don't you want to be a part of that? Don't you want to be one of the ones who helped make a difference, who took a stand when it really mattered? The clock is ticking. You've heard the warnings. Now the question is, will you listen? Will you be someone who steps forward and says, I will not stand by. I will take action. You have that power. You have that choice. It's time. Don't wait.
Thank you for watching and stepping into this eye-opening experience. I hope it opened your mind and heart. Now, before you go, if this video made you reflect on your own life, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments, whether it's a prayer, a hope, or just something that resonated with you. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share this with anyone who needs to hear this message. Stay alert, stay safe, and remember, the truth is out there. Let's discover it together.